the discourse and the reality are so violent in every way. It's Much Spen who I think first said, or maybe it was Peace Now, occupation corrupts, right? And saying that whatever we're doing is corrupting us just the same, is seeping back into us just the same. And now we can kind of say the occupation corrupted, like all the practices of military supremacy that Israeli has been have been controlling and crushing another people with have come home.
Welcome to Women Ending War, the podcast where Palestinian and Israeli women talk about partnerships for peace, real solutions, and ideas for crafting a new world.
It's where we express our pain, anger, dreams, creativity, and vision, where hope is a conscious choice.
معاكم أميرة مسلم.
I'm Ilana Stockman. Thanks for joining us.
So today we have a very special guest that I respect and I love from the bottom of my heart. Tamar is our guest for today, and I knew her just a few months ago, but today I consider her more than a sister. A few months ago, I was actually invited to speak in Union Square on the 7th of October, Memorial Day, as the only Palestinian. Actually, I was like the only Palestinian among all these Jewish and Israeli people, and I was so nervous. And I had the first chat with Tamar because she is part of a group called Israelis for Peace, and they were hosting this event and this Memorial Day, and they invited me to give a speech, and that's how I knew Tamar. And after 2 weeks in, I went to her house in Brooklyn and I stayed for 1 week there. So yes, that's Tamar. And go ahead, Tamar. Tell us more about
For
yourself.
me, in this like I don't know what the adjective is for the past year and a half, but one of the cracks and everything where the light gets in, as Leonard Cohen says, is actually meeting Amira and connecting in the way that we did, and not just as okay, I'm a peace activist, she's a peace activist, not beyond that, just as two people who enjoy hanging out, which is sounds so basic and prosaic, but is actually entire systems exist to prevent that.
That's the vision, isn't it? The vision is where we see each other just as people,
Well, we're able to because even physically the systems exist to block it, not just narrative wise, emotionally, all these things. And that's also something like a little bittersweet about doing activism here, is that it allows you to make connections that might have been harder to make there. I mean, in this case, I feel like Amira works with internationals and Israelis doing UCP all the time. So she does her work is to break down these barriers, basically physically. But yeah, we got to know each other here. Amira spoke at our vigil, the 1 year vigil that had a lot of people. We had like 1,000 people there, more in Union Square. And it had a lot of some speakers from our community and then some speakers from like local leadership that are neither Israeli nor Palestinian or Jewish or connected at all, but just being on the progressive side of local politics. And the day was, it feels to me that every day is like a microcosm that could be an entire feature film, and the different tensions and positionalities in there. Like that day of the vigil, we had Amira. You were dealing, I think, with a big tragedy that day, I remember, with your friend's husband.
Yes.
And we had another community member whose husband's brother, who was sent to Lebanon, did not return, and she also came with that. So everything is alive. We're not doing a memorial for something that is in the past. We're trying to deal with current grief that's just growing as we're talking, which is still the position we're in.
And you came to this work also from a place of grief, yes, Tamar?
This time around, yeah, kind of, yes, because October 7th, my aunt, who is elderly from Kibbutz Be'eri, was murdered by
What
Hamas, and
what was her
also
name?
her name was Chana Kritzman.
Hannah
Chana,
Kritzman. Mm-hmm.
yeah. She was 88. She's like murdered on her golf cart during the evacuation. And also the brother of a close friend. So I had gone to Israel pretty quickly after for the Shiva, for the Shivot actually, multiple. Um, and then when I came back, I mean, at the same time, I also, another relevant detail is that since 2017, I think I've been running a small direct donation program in Gaza with some Gazan women. So I was immediately also very worried about them. Like there was no time to stagger my allegiance. Like everything was happening at the same time. So I had gone to Israel, and when I came back, we kind of realized that we don't actually have a place that we feel comfortable protesting in or mourning in the local scene of New York. So we decided to produce a vigil before we started doing weekly protests. And we did two vigils at the very beginning of the war in November 23 and December 23. Um, and from the beginning, the vigils had voices, they weren't nationalist, they were just humanistic. So from the beginning, we spoke about the victims of October 7th and of what was happening in Gaza. It was even 3 weeks into, there was already thousands of people.
Wow.
Um, I mean,
Wow.
being killed, not coming to the, like we were
Oh,
doing, yeah,
sorry. All
like
right.
it was already doing like a grief and motion vigil. So we had voices from we. I usually read from one of my friends in Gaza, and then we had from families of the hostages, from like Vivian Silver's son, his text, stuff like that, and also what was happening in the West Bank. We already were kind of doing that and raising voices from the West Bank because, as Amira knows better than anyone, the absolute crazy violence with no rules and no anything happened immediately after October 7th, and nobody was looking because that wasn't where things were happening.
Yes.
Um,
It's
so
like a
we spoke,
deflection. It's like the Gaza war like deflects our attention away from the
Yeah,
West
it,
Bank.
it's not about only the deflection of people, but it's the media. All eyes were on Gaza. All the media was concentrating on Gaza because it's big. We cannot compare, but still, in the West Bank there has been uh, a silence catastrophe. I don't want to call it
Mm,
other than that because they were like settlers attacks, settler violence, IDF every night, every day they are invading. They stopped the permits for like the workers in Israel, demolishing houses everywhere, even without demolishing orders, and so many other things, and so many martyrs also. Maybe not
mm,
the same as in Gaza, but like we had almost every day at least 1 to 5 to 10 people being killed in the West Bank,
mhm.
and nobody was like, you turn on the CNN, you turn on BBC, nothing, as if the West Bank is like calm and everything is cool, and but no, we were being, until now actually, yeah, living in a nightmare in the West Bank, and nobody cares.
And also settler violence. We talked last time also about the settler
Yes,
violence, and we saw it again on Jerusalem Day. It wasn't the West
yes.
Bank; it was the old city of Jerusalem. All of that violence with all the death to the Arab stuff and like the
and at the
attacks.
same time, there were also pogroms in the West Bank. Like it
Mm.
wasn't that there was a
Oh yeah,
pause.
yeah.
Like
Exactly.
There
maybe
was
for the day because it's the same people, but not more.
Yeah.
there was some big event, some big attack on a Bedouin village over the weekend that
Yeah.
was wrongly reported in the news. I saw a post from someone who was there writing about how the media reported it like, oh, there was some little clashes, but it was actually an attack.
No, all
Yeah,
those word clashes.
yeah,
There wasn't any
When
clash.
you hear the word clashes, that's when you have to dig a little deeper. It's
Yeah.
usually not just waves of the same size crashing into each other.
Yeah.
Usually there's an aggressor.
Yeah, I know the story from the same community. Their cousin is like a friend of mine, and he told me what really happened. The community was faced one day. Some group of settlers just came in near their like tents and homes, and they were like installed a station for them, these settlers, and they would take shower naked. They would like be walking around naked, and this like Bedouin community is a conservative yani, community, you know,
Mm.
and they couldn't bear that, you know. They were like, they couldn't make their like children or girls or women see these scenes, you know, for like settlers naked, and that's
It's
what
crazy
really
because
made them
they're
leave.
religious themselves.
Yeah,
Right.
you think
Right.
they care?
It's
But
really
Yeah.
heartbreaking.
So
It's
yeah,
really
yeah.
heartbreaking.
Let's go back to
So I'm
Tamar.
curious, right?
Continue.
So Tamar, I'm really curious, like how people respond in New York. You're in Brooklyn. You live in Brooklyn, you said?
yeah,
Yeah, those are my stomping grounds. That's where I come from.
I
Um,
mean, I feel like what was interesting and allowed us, or I can speak for myself, gave me a little bit of fuel and a little bit of feeling like I'm on a track that's worth pursuing, is that the responses were immediately across the board amazing. We had our first vigil, it had about 200, 250 people. The following day, we were in the New York Times. And because there was, and still is, um, a gap, like a kind of there's what I thought after the first vigil is that the discourse here is so polarized in a way that is, in my opinion, not actually benefiting people on the ground, not actually benefiting change, and that it was like that from the first minute. It was like the social mediaification, the Hollywoodification of everything, to break it into really digestible bits that you can know who's good and who's bad and feel good about yourself immediately. And here's to say we're not trying to paint a symmetry. Before we're peace activists, we're anti occupation activists, and there's no peace without justice and equality, to just get that out of the way. It's not, this is not kind of a woohoo discourse. It's a very practical discourse that we're interested in being in. And we also believe that denying, especially right after things happen, the trauma of one side is, you can't build anything on that. You can build a narrative war. You can build, a back and forth, but you're not going to build something that's larger than the sum of its parts. You're going to build a larger argument. Um, so once we had done this event, really just to be able to have a space for ourselves, like this community here that already existed, this community that's already active, because we were the anti-occupation bloc for the anti-judicial reform protests that were happening here.
oh, so you had been protesting already along
Yes.
with.
And with
Mhm,
some of these people, I also mobilized in 2014 again, during Protective Edge, and we did some outreach and messaging then.
mhm.
Um, but what had happened after this, after October 7th happened, is that the discourse became that in most cases you were required to leave like the humanity of someone at the door. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that even if it wasn't my family specifically, but definitely when it was. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to let this discourse that, again, I don't think it's beneficial. Like I'm willing to swallow things that are not comfortable for me if there's efficacy that I can see, but not for purity tests, not for that.
Like, what do you
Um,
mean? Like, what does that mean to you? Like,
to be like completely honest, if I wanted to go to a protest that cared about what's happening to Palestinians, let's say a JVP protest, I would have to agree to never mention the hostages or October 7th or anything like that that is painful. And I'm
oh,
not willing to do that.
oh, I didn't.
Um,
Interesting.
when the messaging omits either side, and at the same time, I understand why the hostage HQ is doing what they're doing, but at the same time, only Israeli protests that had no mention of the human beings on the other side of the fence that weren't Israeli also
Right.
didn't feel comfortable and didn't
Right.
feel like in alliance with what I believe and what a lot of people in our community believe, which is that we're intertwined and one people's security and the other, they're one and the same. There's no pro this or pro that. You can be very clear and say Israel is the aggressor. But if you're just like you can't be pro one side without being the other because there's no prosperity for under violent rule for anybody.
I didn't realize that the JVP protests were that like strict about what you aren't allowed to mention.
They've never
That's
mentioned the hostages or October 7 victims, so that says a lot.
mm.
It's not that I'm that necessarily wanting to, shoot inside the barrel, but from the beginning, it was very, very clear that there's no space to show. There's a philosophy of don't weaponize my pain. I'm not going to show you empathy. I'm not going to show you humanity because it might be weaponized. And I very much don't agree with that. I don't think that um, as Israel is in no lack of weapons or pain. It does not need narratives from internationals in order to justify itself. It's justifying itself in a way that is rogue and messianic. It has nothing to do with those kind of feelings in the Western world.
So you're straddling this fence where you're, pushing back against the black and white either or thinking, the sort of zero sum game, like, if I care about one side, then I
Exactly.
care. Right. So I'm curious how that's right. That's hard. I do the same thing. Also, I posted this week on Facebook about how just because, you have room in your heart to, you know, have empathy for more than one group of people who are suffering at the same time. That's the whole, it's a concept that's very foreign to a lot of the discourse, around this war and around, you know, Palestinians and Israelis in general. Like I had a really shocking conversation with a friend of mine a couple of months ago. Also, she also lives in New York, and she's been, very active with J Street and all kinds of organizations. And we were talking about anti-Semitism, and then we started talking about what was happening in Gaza, and she said to me, "I can't be thinking about what's going on in Gaza. It's just I can't even think about it." And I was like, "Really?" I found it like really, sort of it was hard. It was hard to hear that, So I'm just curious from your experiences, in the New York community, what kind of what kind of responses you get to your position here, where you're saying, I have empathy for this side, quote unquote, and I have empathy for this side also, and the idea that our pains are intertwined, or like Amira said last week, we're all here to stay. Nobody's going anywhere, and our fates are intertwined. Like, what kind of reactions do you get there?
All kinds, actually. I think that, it's also different the kind of responses that you get online and the kind of responses that you get live because people are not that brave. Most people won't tell you to your face the things they feel very
Oh,
comfortable doing online.
oh yeah. A guy this today called me an anti-Semite online who doesn't know me, and he kept going on about it. He's like, I'm like, okay,
Yeah, but
yeah.
so we obviously get a lot of hate from both sides because
Mhm.
something that a lot of people find really offensive is it's kind of interesting when you dare to say that neither society is a monolith. That really makes people like rabid because they need for the other side to be a monolith in order to feel what they're feeling. They need to generalize all millions of people because otherwise they themselves might be in a bigoted position or maybe they should be feeling empathy that they're not. Like it
Mhm.
threatens how people feel about themselves when you
Mhm.
say something that doesn't sound at all radical. It sounds
Mhm.
actually just like very obvious. Like obviously both societies are not a monolith. I can't find 10 people who agree on everything. So
Right.
millions?
Right. But that's the
Um
thinking that justifies, the
exactly.
2.2 million Gazans, they're all Hamas and they all deserve to die.
Exactly.
It's
It's
that
the
thinking, like
same
they're all,
language.
yeah.
And you feel people and I can see it cuz I mean, unfortunately for me, I'm like pretty active on Twitter, and I can. It sometimes happens that I'll write something that seems to me very not the most radical thing I think or can write, and have one day 1,000 of like rabid. It's hard to like define the groups because I don't know what Zionism really means. So I'm not like the Zion, but pro-Israeli without any critical thinking people, let's put it that way, get super mad at me and like call me a capo and wish I died in the Holocaust. And the following day, I'll get 1,000 people from what I don't want to call the pro-Palestinian side because I don't think this kind of language is very helpful, saying the same exact thing to me and how they wish I died in the Holocaust. Same thing, same tweet,
Yeah,
same responses. And the groups who are, you know, really into performative cruelty, I don't have any other word for that, to really go and try to think about the most horrible thing that you can say and then feel really proud about yourself. um, they're very similar. The beliefs are similar, it's just kind of the names that you can switch around. So there's
Mm,
that. But
mm,
more than that, there's a lot of support. There's a lot of people who say thank you for creating the space where I feel comfortable in. And it's not just the space, like it's more, I just believe in language. I believe in language as the tool for everything. And especially in our digital age, where a lot of what you're doing is putting out like little messages into the world. And I feel like what I'm really happy to be doing is help with messaging things, help with like breaking things down in a way that makes sense, um, in a human rights lens. Because at the end of the day, that's the one lens that I care about. Is something effective for promoting more human rights to more people quickly, or isn't it? And that's how things
mm.
are. That's why I was so like into Amira's project, because it was so, it has efficacy. Like this is what's happening on the ground. Like that's the holy grail for me in activism. Something that has efficacy, that has clear call to action, and it's not rooted in separatism. It's rooted in something that's trying to build something better, even if it seems right now almost naive and like silly. But like, okay, so we don't. Is that a better option?
exactly.
I want to get back to a second for what you said before about generalizing the other, because one of the things that comes up a lot on our podcast is, the process of dehumanization of, that that's also what I was brought up on. I wrote a book about this, about how I grew up in Flatbush and in the religious Zionist world. I went to the same school as the same yeshiva as Meir Kahana, and you know I've really like had to reconcile with this, that Ben Greer and I are from the same world, and what that means and what does it take to like unpack all of that. And one of the biggest things is how much we were taught to dehumanize Palestinians, like complete dehumanization. And I have this argument with people, all the time about people who like are justifying what's happening in Gaza, because like they all deserve to die kind of thing. And it's like, you realize we killed 20,000 babies and children.
Yeah.
What are you saying? Like, what are you saying? And so it comes down to this. It comes down to that whole, what you were talking about, the generalizing. And it reminds me of a book, a really important book that I talk about all the time also, by Sila Ben Habib. And she talks about the generalized and concrete other. The book is called Situating the Self. And she talks about the generalized and concrete other. And she says what people often tend to do is, with the other, with themselves, they give each other, they give themselves details. Right, with ourselves, we give ourselves details. We have context, we have feelings, we have circumstances, we have nuances, we have differences, we have human sides. That's ourselves. We're concrete, we have concrete details. With the other, it's all generalized, no
Yeah,
context, no individual. It's just like this vague caricature thing. She talks about that and how important that process
Yeah,
is. And
we
it's,
do that all the time. And like our challenge as individuals is to maybe extend the same complexity to
yes,
others that in which we
exactly.
see ourselves. And the same exact thing goes for groups and nations,
Yeah,
and it's the same.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
very, very like once you, I think that, you know, if you exist in the States as an Israeli or as a Palestinian or as somebody whose area is like getting the attention, somebody who's on the news, then you hear the generalizations about you all the time. You were like
Yeah.
privy to people who are like, this is the society. And you're like, well, but maybe it isn't. And maybe you should listen to people from there who speak the language. You've had to, like, no, I know how to. Have you ever heard of the translate tweet option? And like, that's where the discourse is.
Mm. So, like the
So,
other day, with the Jerusalem flag parade, all that violence in the old city. So, somebody, I saw a thread where, this religious guy, he's a religious guy. I know him professionally. He gets on the thread and he's saying, no, it's not all religious people like that. And don't you know that a lot of religious people are, nice or whatever. So, somebody else responded exactly what you just said, that like, so when it comes to the Palestinians, you want to say, well, they're all responsible, and they're all responsible for
yeah.
Hamas, and they're all responsible for October 7th. But here with yourself, you have this group of thugs, hooligans,
Yeah.
doing all this violence, but you're like, oh no, 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 they're just, a few scattered few. So like it raises a big question for me, how much are we responsible for people that are doing bad things in our names? You
Mhm.
know, like it's a big question for me. I mean, I don't have an actual answer. Like it's something that I grapple with, because when I do see religious people doing really terrible things, and I know I come from that world, it's really like hard for me. It's like
Of
I
course.
that's part of why I'm doing all this work, is because I feel this like urgent need to say, no, you guys really need to stop doing this. And it's always like a sense of we. Do you know what
Hmm.
I mean? When I see religious people doing things, it feels like we. It feels like this is my world and my culture, doing it in my name. And so if I don't speak out, then who else is going to speak out?
Hmm.
So, but it's like a really big question, I think, how this issue of like, when people, when we say, oh well, they represent their whole group, like if someone's doing something bad, then it's like their whole group. And it's like, we have to, like exactly what you said, I feel like, we have to give to others the same sort of gentleness and empathy and courtesy that we would like want for ourselves.
Welcome everyone to season 4 from Women Ending War. معاكم أميرة مسلم ومعاكم
I'm Ilana Stockman. Thank you for being here with us. We're happy to have you here. And if you like what you're hearing, what you're watching, don't forget to subscribe, follow, like, and share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, so tell us a little more, Tamar, about what your group does, and about who's in it and what your activities are.
Our bread and butter is that we protest every Sunday, and we have been since the end of 2023. So most of this war. So we protest every Sunday at Union Square, 5 in the summers, 4 in the winters. Um, and that's kind of the basis of the community. And in these protests, we usually have speakers that are coming from the land, like any Palestinian or Israeli peace activist, whatever, who is doing the work and is coming to the East Coast, usually speaks at one of the protests, and sometimes we'll do another event that will allow for like a more in-depth conversation and kind of educating the community. Um, and then the other thing that we do is that in these protests we try to supply, and these are things that happened as they happened, like they weren't planned. This is the essence of grassroots. We did an event for us, it was huge, we're like, okay, let's do another one. And then we figured out, unfortunately, what everybody kind of understood a few months into the war, that actually this is going to take a very long time, and we need to build a structure of dissent that is sustainable and that feels like an ongoing thing. So we're very adamant about doing it every Sunday. In the last year and a half, we've missed like maybe Seder once, because it literally was the night of
Mm.
Seder, and 4th of July once or something like that. But that's it.
And
Um,
how many people come typically?
It could be, usually we don't go below 40. That's kind of the minimum core group. It could be like 100. It could be,
Wow.
depending on the actions, like around 70, 100. Or a lot of people like individual. Yeah, that was 1,000.
Amira, what
So
was
it's
that like for you,
very,
that experience? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
sorry,
Exactly.
what?
I was going to ask Amira, can you tell us about that experience, what that was like speaking to that group?
To start with, it was so scary because I wanted to speak on behalf of my people. At the same time, I wanted to show these people who are in that square empathy, and that I feel with them, that I see their pain, that I hear them. At the same time, I wanted them to see and recognize my pain and what I've been going through, not only since the 7th of October, but like even before, for so many years. And it was big responsibility. I was like really terrified, honestly. Imagine just to show my empathy with those, like the families of the victims of the 7th of October. It was terrifying, not because I don't want to show them, but because I didn't want to be attacked, looked at as a traitor, because this is also what will I see from, not, it doesn't have to be from my own society. It could be from the pro-Palestine audience, that they will see me as like normalization, traitor, da da da. How come you say about the 7th of October victims? How do you condemn? And they would like attack me, and I got attacked. Yeah, yeah. And I got attacked actually on social media, and I had like so many comments about that. And not only pro Palestinians or Palestinians, but Israelis themselves. Like they were mocking of me as if I was lying, as if I was just pretending to be grieving with my Israeli colleagues, or like the people who were there in the Union Square. But at the end of the day, I went there, I stood up proudly and with lots of pain also, looked in the eyes of the Israelis for peace and every Jewish person who was there coming to grieve the 7th of October. And I think I was able to get the message out and to tell them enough. We cannot, we cannot continue revenging. We have to stop this cycle of violence, because we should honor the death not by killing and revenging, but by living in just peace, in equality, and name it, name it. But like, we have to stop that. Somebody has to stand up and say, "Khalas, enough, must speak," you know. And it was very touching. Like I saw people looking at me, and like some people were crying. I was like, at some point I was like, my heart was like beating so fast. And it was an amazing feeling just to feel that I was standing there and I felt with their grief, and it was okay, and it was beautiful. And that's what make us human beings. Come on, our hearts and our minds and our brains and our empathy. God created us to love and feel, not to dehumanize the other. And so, yeah, and that's how I knew Tamar, because she spoke before me. And I didn't know that her aunt was killed on the 7th of October. And I was like amazed, because she was like the one inviting me, and I was like, okay, I was confused. Like, how come a person whose aunt was killed by my people to invite me to speak at their vigil, and she saw like my speech and she was okay with it, like I was so confused, but at the same time I was so happy that it could work, it could happen, it can happen. We need to stop believing our leaders and believe in ourselves and in each other, and that's it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
that's huge what you're describing also. I mean, Tamar, I mean, what Amira just described about that, being your family are victims of October 7th, yet you're not using that position of victimhood to go and attack the other, but to instead call for peace. Like Vivian Silver's son, for example, or like, Maoz also, who's like, there is this trend. I don't know, I don't want to call it a trend, but like there are people who have experienced the worst and are still coming out the other side and saying, like, halas, like, what Amir said, like coming out and saying we can make this different. We can, How has that been for you? Like, how did you come to that place?
I mean, I grew up in a very, like, I'm pretty lucky and rare in the left community in the sense that I'm second generation to this. My parents are very lefty. They met in a protest themselves. They were members of Matzpen in the late 60s. Um, so I was kind of brought up and taught nonviolence and anti-occupation and peace and these kind of things carried a lot of weight in the home that I grew up in. We went to a lot of protests growing up, and my political life wasn't shaped, or it was shaped, but did not begin on October 7th. Um, this wasn't me waking up to the reality of what's happening. I was awake to the best of what I know awakeness is, and when it happened, it was so devastating in so many ways. But it was very clear to me that the solution of killing my friends in Gaza is not going to bring anyone back to life, and
Or
it's just an
security.
endless cycle.
Mm.
So I can tell you that when I was, um, I don't remember, I was like a tween before I was a teenager, and that was when there was a series of bombings right after the Rabin assassination, and between when Netanyahu got elected 8 months later. Um, and when I was a teenager, a young teenager, I was in one of these bombings, and nothing happened to me physically, but like I saw everything, and it was a large event. There were like 13 people dead, and then we got evacuated, and I went across the street, and I was kind of still stunned, and maybe it was 10 or 20 minutes after the bombs went off, right? It was very, very immediately. Like the bodies were still there and everything. And there were already hundreds of people behind the barricades, and they were yelling death to Arabs and revenge and all that, like right after the bombing. And I mean, without being too graphic, I guess now we live in a world where everything is so graphic. The visuals we're seeing every day, um, but when they were screaming for more blood, there was still blood on the street.
Exactly.
Like we were still smelling the blood. And I was only like 13 or 14, but it was very clear to me that this is an endless cycle, that there's nothing that comes after blood except for more blood. And I think that day was a very meaningful day for me growing up. And that didn't get shaken by the murder of my aunt because unfortunately she's another one of the cycle. She hasn't ended the cycle. The cycle, if anything, got much worse. So it was very clear to me from day one that in order to eliminate Hamas in the situation, both physically and how they function in what's in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places on Earth, that there's no way to do any of that without an insane cost in civilian human life. It just is not possible. So I had objected from the beginning, before which was not extremely common in Israel or in Israeli communities, but I didn't see any way for a military operation to happen without war crimes level of civilian casualties, and that's immediately what happened.
Wow. Well, your story is really inspiring to me, actually. The ability to respond to blood with the opposite of calling for more blood. That really brings me a lot of hope. and also, the ability to see things in a context even when you're in pain, because that's, I think, part of the challenge here, is that so many people are very deeply traumatized in lots of different ways, and so they come from the place of trauma to a place of like the attack or the needing more blood or needing revenge and all of those things. And the the depth of what you're doing here, or the the greatness really, is not living in the trauma and in that need for revenge, but saying, okay, I'm feeling my trauma, I'm feeling my pain, I'm feeling the mourning and the loss, but also I'm able to retain my humanity and my sense of like what it means to be a human being even within the trauma. I mean, that's the challenge, I think, and it's also the goal. It feels like that's the lesson here. I feel like that I want to, that I want to spread, like, yeah, people are hurting, lots and lots and lots of people are hurting in lots of different ways, and we need to, say, okay, we're hurting, but also we need to still hang on to our humanity and also take a broader view and say, hang on, how can we fix this whole thing? How can we fix this whole thing so that there's no more of this? That we don't, none of us do this, none of us experience this, and none of us go for blood. I mean, it's hard, but it's doable. You bring me a lot of hope and inspiration that
Oh,
it's
good.
doable. Yeah.
I'm
Mira, what do you
glad.
think?
I believe even the past 2 years were like so hard, and what we saw and what we experienced, and how we saw the reactions of so many people around the world, not in only in Israel. Me as a Palestinian, of course, I'm talking, but I still, and call me naive or call me stupid, but I still believe in humanity. I still believe that a person, no matter what, how radical he was or he is, could be changed and could be, you know, like his mind, his brain, his like beliefs could be flipped if he is given the right container, if he is given the right love and care, you know. So I believe that we need to work more on a very basic level, you know, love. Like really, like maybe I don't know how to explain it in my like true words, but to show love to someone who is like very radical, to show him empathy, that's when he starts bringing the human inside of him and having empathy with the other in front of him. And I say it because I watched one day some kind of documentary where it showed like some people who were on the point of doing like a suicide attack, not only in Palestine and Israel, but like abroad, you know, in other countries, and how at the last moment those people changed their mind.
Mm,
And that change was a scene in front of them, like a child, a pregnant woman, somebody who said something very nice, an older man, you know, like a human being in front of him. And he came back to his humanity, you know. So I know this might be a little bit naive, but I believe that we need to work more on like trauma and healing. Like we need, and Tamar, when she was here 2 weeks ago, and I told her, from the river to the sea, everybody needs therapy. And I believe I saw it on
Oh, that's good. From the
some
river to
kind
the
of
sea, everybody needs
poster
therapy.
in one of the
That's
demonstrations in Tel Aviv. Actually, I saw it like somebody was holding it, and I loved it. And that's true. Let's start there. Let's start by healing traumas. And actually, not healing because we're not healed yet. We're like, it's not finished to start healing, but like to start the small steps even before healing.
mm,
So, yeah, that's
amazing.
how I believe.
So thank you.
This is why I
That was
find
beautiful.
Amira
Yeah.
so gives me a strength sometimes because I think it's a constant struggle because we're all like nonviolent and we're peace activists, but I'm angry and I'm sure you're angrier, you know. And I spend a couple of weeks ago I went to visit Amira and we drove around and She showed me everything that was happening in the past year and a half, and like how much worse things have gotten. And then at night we hung out and had fun with friends and like did something else. And a part of me was so like impressed, or I don't know if impressed is even the word, because the anger is there. You can't, it's there. What do you do with it? Where do you take it? Like, how do you not function from that place, but kind of rather acknowledge it and function from another place? And like, literally, actually, I was going to text you 2 days ago, just what do you do with the anger? Because I was watching the flag parade in Jerusalem, and I felt rage. I didn't feel like a peace activist. I felt hateful, and I was so glad that Standing Together were there to do some protective work. Speaking of unarmed civilian protectors, um, but this feeling is something that like we as peace activists have to deal with. We can't just bury it. We have to be like, what is this, and what do we do with it, and how do we breathe through it, and
uh, apply it in the right direction. That's what I do. Like, for example, maybe I'm not like, you know, ending the war or like freeing the hostages or like freeing the all the prisoners or whatever, but I'm trying to do something. So if each one of us gets this anger. I get angry every moment. It's not like every day, even,
yeah, of
Tamar. For me, it's like every moment of my
course.
life here in the West Bank. It's like going out from here, seeing the apartheid wall, seeing the settlement, and going to the road, seeing a jeep of IDF coming in, invading the city. I'm scared for my son who's going to school. Like every moment that I'm breathing in the West Bank here, I'm angry. I'm angry at what's happening in Gaza. I'm angry at our life, and I'm angry how it's not stopping.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then I say, okay, I get angry. I shout. I then what it will benefit anybody if I just like get angry and that's it. And that's why I always try to do lots of like activities or like activism,
Hmm.
and I do like many things and like at the same time I'm like sometimes I'm overwhelmed. I was just telling Elena before the
Mm,
podcast, because I'm like overwhelmed. I'm like I want to do so many things because I feel helpless, because I feel angry, because I feel like there should be something to be done to be
yeah.
this to stop
Yeah.
you know
Can I say that anger is sometimes a holy thing? I think
yes.
anger could be really, really holy. There's a book by Sarala Chemali. She's a feminist critic. It's called Rage Becomes Her. Right? And she talks about rage. And also Rebecca Traister also wrote a
Yeah,
book about
good
anger,
and mad,
Good and
right?
Mad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like
So
that
like
book.
there's a lot of like feminist reclaiming the anger, because the anger first of all is right. You know, it's right. We're
Yeah.
so often, especially as women, like we're so often trained to not show the anger, to not make a scene,
Drama. Don't
drama.
do
Yeah, don't,
drama.
Yeah.
yeah. But it's like, the anger is right. You know what I'm saying? The anger is right.
Yeah.
And
But what
and
do you
the and
do
the
with
anger
it?
yeah. Well,
We Yeah,
this
we
you
did
just
an
keep speaking.
action this
Yeah.
weekend, um, which is, growing in horrible popularity with the photos of the children killed in Gaza.
Yeah.
So we've been holding them up, but in this last weekend, it's what we did. We sat and did the same thing with like the two levels of people just standing and sitting and not saying anything. And all throughout, there were two people at like a soapbox open mic. Both, one was anti-Zionist, one was Zionist. Both were anti-Semitic in like a comedy way. Like the things that these guys were saying while listening to the sound of their own, like the guy who cared so much about what's happening in Gaza didn't feel like maybe he should be quiet and look at the pictures of the children who are dead and honor them instead of yelling and cursing. And the guy who was a Zionist who wanted everyone to fight him because he was so strong didn't care enough about like the Bibas children to honor their photo there. They were kind of talking about, they enjoyed the sound of their own voices. Um, and we were hearing terrible things, but for an hour we just sat quietly with that anger. and with that sorrow. And at the end of the day, it proved to me again how nonviolence work is just so much more effective. Even if you want to scream in the middle sometimes, like at the end of the day, we were sitting there trying to honor people who have become statistic human beings and have their names and their age, and just sit there because, to be honest, like, I write most of our speeches and stuff like that. I'm very close to being out of words, like
Mm,
for describing week after week what is happening.
yeah, yeah.
So we had moved to doing kind of a silent protest, and by the end of it I was reinforced in my belief in complete nonviolent action,
Yeah.
because I saw what happened when two guys were just brawling. There 20 more guys were also standing out and cheering them on as if it was like a boxing match or whatever, breakdance. Like, it did not seem like a discussion, it seemed like performance.
And Tamar,
Whereas we were sitting with quiet and with no violence and having thousands of people just come up and engage and take a photo and take a minute to think.
Mhm.
So it is something that you kind of like deal with all the time. And perhaps it is a little bit of engine that we can use, but
Yeah, it's totally an engine. I believe it. I totally believe it is an engine, and also I believe that it's like I said. I believe that sometimes the anger is holy in that it's response because the anger comes from a place of screaming for humanity, for justice, for protection. Yes. So, Tamar, thank you. Amira, thank you.
thank you
Any
so
final
much.
thoughts you want to share? Amira, any final things you want to
no,
share?
I just want to say one last word. Like, if anybody really don't believe that nonviolence work, read some history books. Read some history books. There are so many stories where countries and people and like cities and villages and like clans made peace and
Hmm.
came into a peace process with a non-violent actions and not by with blood and with sword and
Right.
or with a
Yes,
gun
I
or with
even
a
have one
rocket.
Right.
of those books right here by my desk that I can plug.
Oh,
This is
nice.
just
Yes,
studies. This is just studies about nonviolence versus violent campaigns, and in all kinds
yes,
of very, very helpful. It also has
Yeah.
a really beautiful piece of information that says that historically, when above 3.5 of the populace were out on the streets, the government fell.
exactly, exactly.
Wow.
That's the
Interesting.
ratio.
That's like the
Yeah.
tipping point.
Yes.
Okay.
Like,
That's really good
according
to
to
know.
this.
Wow.
Um,
I'm inspired by Lema Bowie. I mean, that's what Lema Bowie did in Liberia. She brought, she brought an end to the civil war in Liberia with marches of women. You know,
yeah.
S-
So, like, I think
Gandhi,
what's
Martin.
happening in Israel Palestine right now is that the discourse and the reality are so violent in every way. And the way that the government is, it's Mutt Spen who I think first said, or maybe it was Peace Now, occupation corrupts, right? This was already in the 70s or 80s. And, saying that whatever we're doing is corrupting us just the same, is seeping back into us just the same. And now we can kind of say the occupation corrupted, like all the practices of military supremacy that
Mm,
Israeli has been have been controlling and crushing another people with have come home. Right, the guy who invented the skunk tank thing with the water,
Yeah.
mm.
he was skunked in Tel Aviv by Ben
Really?
Gvir's police. Yeah,
Yes, I
like
saw it. I saw the story.
everything is a cycle, and the arresting political dissent. We've been doing that to Palestinians since forever. And now we have Ben Gvir's police starting to do that to first Palestinian citizens of Israel, which are really getting attacked since October 7th
Yeah.
in a crazy way, and then
Yeah.
to leftists, and then to middle of the road people. And the thing is, it's the same as when the deportation started here. People were feeling safe because they're not in the group that's being deported.
Yeah.
That's not how fascism has ever worked. It's not
First
like,
they
oh, I
came for
got to a
the
place
that's the
I'm
poem.
comfortable with and we're going to stop here because why be greedy? That's not how totalitarian regimes work. And
But
that's what's
it
happening
happened
right
with
now in
people.
Israel,
Yeah.
inside of Israel. And very, very hopefully, there is a change in the zeitgeist that is happening because of this as well.
Yeah.
But our role as nonviolent activists has kind of only become more important because of the stark contrast. So, like, if I would end with some words, I feel like people who are already watching this are already convinced by this, but whatever mic I will be given in the, you know, in these times, I will say one word, and that word will always be refuse at this point. Like, I think the refusal is what we should really be like in every way. I'm not talking about just, teenagers. That's what I would say to my own society. And to the society around here, I would just like invite people to engage with us because we also don't see our role as done as soon as this particular war is over. Like a lot of work just begins.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, whereas I have critique of the movement here as a part of it, I also am first and foremost very happy that it has grown and that people care and that now we see on the news things that did not make the news in 2021 and definitely did not make the news in 2018 or 2014. So the fact
So
that people are
you're
waking,
seeing a change. You think
there's a
people are
huge
getting
change.
more aware. Huge change.
Of
And
course.
Amira, you were
How
saying
could they
last
not?
week you also, yeah?
Hmm.
Amira was saying the same thing last week, yes, that you also see definite change.
Crazy
Yes.
change.
Yes.
Things have
I see
completely
it
changed
as
because we have.
little as like Facebook posts, I see it on my wall, or from my like from Israeli friends and like colleagues or like activists, or the language changed. Even the language, even on social media, it changed.
You mean in the last month or generally in the last 2 years?
No, no, no. In the last 2 months, actually, since the
since
ceasefire.
since the
Since the
ceasefire, it's
ceasefire.
changed completely.
Yeah.
And then, but I wasn't referring to that. I was referring here to Americans, and many of them American Jewish, but not just, who have been like, oh, okay, like this is not, a sustainable situation that's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And now all of this interest, I don't want to lose it. I don't want for us to lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our role has been from the beginning to amplify people on the ground and bring attention to them. Like,
Yeah.
if Amira's doing a Zoom for the UCP project, then we're co-sponsoring and inviting people. Like, we just want to do what we can to help. So I would
Yes.
end by inviting people who are here to join us and protest and to be a part of this community that honors human life as wherever it
Yeah.
is.
Fantastic. So in New York, join Tamar's group. Here in Israel/Palestine, join Amira's civilian protection group. Yes, there are things
Also
to
in New
do.
York, join Amira's civilian protection group because it is international. And
Oh,
also
Yes.
not just in New York, everywhere.
Of course, it's everywhere.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for doing this and having these conversations and
yeah.
like,
Yeah, and you too. Thanks for everything you do.
yeah.
Thanks for listening to Women Ending War. If you want to help create change, you should join us.
Subscribe, like, comment, or share. Tell your friends about us. Talk about it. Be part of the solution.
Thanks and see you next time.